The moment that really broke me happened at my parents' dining table. My sister's kids were already halfway through their plates, laughing and stuffing their faces, while my 2 kids sat quietly beside me with empty plates. When my son reached for a piece of bread, my mother gently pushed the basket away and said, "Wait, let your cousins finish first. There might not be enough." And then she added, something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. "You can share whatever crumbs are left." I looked at my kids, faces in that moment, confused, embarrassed, trying to pretend they weren't hurt, and something inside me just shattered. I remember feeling this mix of anger, humiliation, and disbelief, because these weren't strangers treating my kids this way. This was my own family. My parents, my sister, people who were supposed to love them just as much as they loved anyone else. So I need to ask you honestly, was I wrong for what I did next? Because when everything exploded later that night, my entire family said I went too far. But after what they did to my kids, I honestly don't know if I could have reacted any differently. To understand how things got to that point, you need to know a little about my family. I'm the older sibling in my family, and growing up, things always revolved around my younger sister. Her name is Emily, and from the time we were kids, she was always treated like the golden child. If she messed up in school, my parents would say she was just stressed. If I messed up, it was a lecture about responsibility. When she got into trouble, someone else was always to blame. When I had a problem, it was apparently my fault for not handling it better. I learned pretty early that life wasn't going to be fair when it came to how our parents treated us, so I stopped expecting fairness. Eventually I moved out, built my own life, and tried to keep some distance from all that drama. I got married, had 2 amazing kids, and honestly, I was proud of the life I built because it wasn't handed to me. I worked for everything I had. Meanwhile, my sister took a very different path. She married young, had 3 kids quickly, and constantly relied on my parents for help. Financial help, babysitting, groceries, you name it. My parents adored her kids and treated them like royalty. Don't get me wrong, grandparents loving their grandkids is normal. But the difference between how they treated Emily's kids and how they treated mine was obvious. At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself maybe I was imagining things or being overly sensitive. But over time, the small things started adding up. Whenever we visited, my sister's kids always got the best seats. The first servings, the biggest portions. My kids were always an afterthought. If there were gifts, Emily's kids would get something big and exciting, while my kids would get something small, or sometimes nothing at all. I remember one Christmas when my daughter quietly asked me in the car on the way home, "Dad, did Grandma forget about us?" That question hit me like a punch in the chest. I told her of course not, that Grandma loved her, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. Still, I kept trying to keep the peace. I didn't want to create a family war. My wife noticed it too, of course. She would squeeze my hand under the table when something unfair happened, silently asking if we should say something. But most of the time I just shook my head. I told her it wasn't worth the drama. Then came the dinner that changed everything. My parents had invited everyone over for a big family dinner. They said they wanted all the grandkids together. My wife and I brought a homemade dessert, and the kids were actually excited to see their cousins. When we got there, the house was already full of noise and chaos. My sister's kids were running around the living room while my parents fussed over them like they were celebrities, arriving at an event. My kids stood there quietly, holding the dessert dish we brought, waiting for someone to notice them. Eventually, my mom said hello, but it felt rushed, like she was distracted. The whole evening had this weird energy that I couldn't quite explain. Dinner was finally ready, and everyone sat down at the table. My mom started serving food, and right away I noticed something strange. She piled huge portions onto my sister's kids' plates first. Chicken, potatoes, vegetables, bread, everything. Then she moved to my kids' plates. And suddenly the portions were tiny. I thought maybe she was just running low on food. But then she went back to refill my sister's kids' plates again before my kids had even taken a bite. My son quietly reached toward the bread basket. And that's when my mom pushed it away and said those words I told you earlier. "Wait, let your cousins finish first. There might not be enough. You can share whatever crumbs are left." The table went silent for a moment. My daughter slowly pulled her hand back. She looked down at her plate and didn't say anything. I felt my face getting hot. My heart was pounding in my ears. I looked around the table, waiting for someone, anyone, to say something. My sister didn't react at all. She just kept eating like nothing had happened. My dad stared at his plate, That's when I realized something that made it even worse. They all thought this was normal. And right there in the middle of that dinner, something inside me snapped. But before I tell you what happened next, I want to pause for a second and ask you something. Imagine you're sitting at that table. Your kids are hungry, watching their cousins get piles of food while they're told to wait for crumbs. Your own parents are the ones doing it. So what would you do? Would you stay quiet to keep the peace, or would you stand up and say something? Because at that moment, I knew I had to make a choice. And I chose not to stay quiet. I stood up from the table so suddenly that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. Everyone looked at me like I had just interrupted something sacred. I walked over to the kitchen counter, grabbed the serving dishes, and brought them back to the table. Then I started filling my kids' plates properly. Big portions, the same portions everyone else had been getting all along. My mom immediately said, "What are you doing?" I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Feeding my kids." She looked shocked, like I had just insulted her personally. My sister rolled her eyes and said, "Oh my God, are you really going to make a scene over food?" That comment was gasoline on the fire. I told her this wasn't about food. It was about how they treated my kids like they were second-class members of the family. I reminded them about the birthdays where my kids got almost nothing, the holidays where they were ignored, the constant favoritism. My dad finally spoke up and said I was overreacting. That was the moment I lost it completely. I told them if they couldn't treat all their grandkids equally, then they didn't deserve to see mine at all. My wife quietly gathered our kids while the room filled with shouting. My sister started yelling about how I was ruining family dinner. My mom said I was being disrespectful in her house, but I didn't care anymore. I looked at my kids, still sitting there awkwardly with their plates, and I realized something important. If I stayed silent, I was teaching them that it was okay for people, even family, to treat them like they were worth less. And that was something I would never allow. So we left. The aftermath was messy. My phone exploded with messages from relatives saying I embarrassed my parents. My sister told everyone I was dramatic and jealous. My mom cried and said I broke her heart. But something interesting happened in the weeks after. My kids stopped asking why Grandma treated them differently, because we stopped going there. And honestly, our home felt a lot more peaceful after that. Looking back, maybe I did make a scene. Maybe I could have handled it more calmly. But if standing up for my kids makes me the bad guy in my family's story, then I'm okay with that. If you made it this far, I really want to know what you think. Was I wrong for confronting my family like that? Or would you have done the same thing if someone treated your kids like they were only worth the crumbs? If you were on my side, make sure to like this video. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama and crazy family situations. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments because honestly, this whole situation still blows my mind sometimes. Thanks for listening to my story, and I'll see you all in the next one.